Are you a parent navigating the complexities of co-parenting, family court, or even domestic violence? If you are looking for ways to help protect your children and build a strong and supportive community around you, then look no further. Grey Minds Think Alike is your go-to resource for everything related to the complexities of family life. Join us as we dive into thoughtful conversations with experts and explore practical tips and strategies for tackling the challenges of parenthood in the throes of adversity so that no parent feels alone and every child's safety is protected. Hello, world. Welcome to today's edition of Grey Minds Think Alike. Today we have all the way from Washington, D.C., Miss Hera McLeod. Hera is a writer and a speaker and a civil rights activist. And most of all, she's a mom. She is known for speaking against violence, particularly on civil rights for women and children, domestic violence, and family court reform. Her new book, Defying Silence, is available wherever you get your books, Amazon and audio. Like me, Hera is a survivor of domestic violence. Her 15-month-old son, Prince, was murdered at the hands of his father, who now faces life in jail. I want to thank you so much for chatting with me today. Thank you. I will give a little backstory. I met Hera in Washington, D.C. last October, I believe. I was there with a group of us trying to go into the Capitol and fight for some more child safety laws that can go federally. And she invited us all to her home, which I thought was lovely. But I never really got a chance to chat with you one-on-one about your story and why we were all there. So I wanted to give you the floor to share your story, what you want people to know about you. And then, of course, I do want to hear all about your book. And I want to know all the things that you're working towards that you want to see happen while you're still alive. I did read a little bit about how your story began and you met your ex on Match.com. I, too, met Greyson's father on Match.com. How did that go for you?
Yeah, I met him back. It's been a while. We met when internet and app dating were not as popular as they are now. And I firmly believe that app dating has ruined dating. I don't know how you feel about it, but I feel like it has ruined dating for so many reasons.
I agree.
And I think part of what people don't realize, unless they've actually been the target of a psychopath like this, is that when you meet someone through your natural circles, although you may be exhausted with that method, there's a way to vet that person in a more natural environment. Whereas when you meet someone on an app, there could be some good things with getting outside of your circle, but the danger is that you really have no one in your life who can give that person a reference. And I think people also don't realize is that these folks are crazy and they will make stuff up and it will seem completely legitimate. And they will also be able to create people in their life that will lie for them. And for me, he presented family that was not actually his family, who said they were, who upheld all of his lies. And so people are like, oh my gosh, how did you not know? I'm like, they tell you to meet the family and friends. What they don't tell you is that people will lie to you. And so, yeah, I still feel very skeptical about app dating. I think the challenge is that in this day and age, it's hard to really do anything else because that's what people do now.
No, absolutely. I moved to New York City and the only way that I could try to meet someone was using apps just because I was new in the city. But yes, it's creating a fake reality.
Yeah. And it's a very useful targeting mechanism, honestly, for people like this, because how else can you go through people and...
Do you feel like you were targeted?
Oh, absolutely. I think people like this do that, right? They don't find another person. They're not looking for another psychopath. They're looking for somebody who is going to be an empath, somebody who's going to be a caregiver. And so I think I was definitely targeted. I think, honestly, if it hadn't been me, it would have been someone else. And it was someone else before me. So I don't think I'm special in any way other than like being a good target, perhaps.
But you think he sought you out particularly for it to end the way it did?
I think he sought me out as a means for his finances. I don't think he necessarily thought, oh, I'm going to impregnate her and then kill our baby. I don't think he was necessarily...
But he made it known that he had money, correct? He said he would do the music.
Right. Like he had money when I met him. I didn't know that he was living off of insurance proceeds from the two other people he killed. And so there's no way to know that even. But if I had known his real family, they would have been like, yeah, he killed his mom for insurance money. But I didn't meet his real family. I met his fake family who said he was a musician and said that they had seen him perform. So it's, I think that he was a predator and he preyed upon women financially and was not above killing people for insurance money. And I think if it hadn't been my son, it probably would have been me, honestly. And I think the only reason it wasn't me is because I left.
I always say that too. I always say I was his target, not Greyson. And he used Greyson just because he knew that it would really be the only thing that he could do to hurt me.
Yeah. And I think it wasn't just financially motivated. He was a sick and evil, twisted person who was angry that I left him and angry because he felt entitled to my money and my body and in all of it. So Prince was the only thing that I couldn't take from him. I couldn't protect from him. The courts wouldn't know.
Let's have our listeners get a little bit of background because I didn't go into it too much. Start at the beginning, whatever you feel comfortable speaking about that you want.
I met him on Match.com. He was a single dad. Told me that his son's mother died in an accident. And I didn't know any different. I was like, that's pretty sad. And
did she die in an accident?
He shot her. He killed her.
And that's a fact.
This is the thing. They didn't charge him for it until after Prince died. And then they charged him. He's never actually had a trial because they ended up dropping it because he's serving life in prison. So they were like,
oh my goodness. And what about that child that he had?
So he went to live with his maternal grandmother.
Okay.
But the thing that was crazy about it is I did not know any of this until I left and hired a private investigator. Of course, I survived. Got to the point where Prince was only 2 weeks old when I left. And I was like, I can't stay here. We can't stay here. It's not safe. And when I hired the private investigator, I found out that on the eve of their custody hearing, she was shot. And he had changed his name to his son's name 6 months before she died. And then claimed that her life insurance policy that she intended on it being for her son was his.
They had different names?
They had different names. He and his son had different names, and he effectively made his son a junior 6 months before this woman died. She died conveniently on the eve of their custody hearing. He found her, I'll put that in quotes,
right?
And then bled all over the crime scene because he was like, oh, I saw her lying there and I broke through the window. Witnesses who live in the area said it's impossible for him to have seen her because the blinds were closed.
And when the police didn't think that this was an odd...
The police effed it all the way up. I go into this in my book, how part of the reason it took me 10 years to write the book is that the story is so incredibly twisted. And I had to go through all of these documents from the other two murders because I was like, how on earth did they F this up? And I talk about a lot. People are like, do you think you've gotten justice because he's in jail? And I'm like, look, he's a sick and twisted individual. And part of me has to feel for him just from a human level, being like, how sad and tragic is it that you are so affected,
right,
whatever mental disorder you have, that you would even kill your own child? That's tragic. He's not the demon in my story. To me, the system is a demon in my story because I should never have met this man. Prince should never have been born. He should have been arrested multiple times over for all of the other people that he killed. And then even if he hadn't been arrested for all those people he killed, the family court should have been the end. They should have been like, yo, we're not doing this. To me, that's the demon in my story. The demon is the police that basically allowed him to kill multiple people before he killed my son, all for the same thing. Like, it was all insurance money motivated, like every single time. And so, yeah, like he killed her. His son's grandparents initially got custody, but then how family court works. And I tell people all the time, I'm like, family court is civil court. If you study the law, you don't have to meet the same threshold as criminal court. You don't have to definitively prove without a reasonable doubt someone did something, right?
Right.
Similar to like the O.J. Simpson trial. We all know O.J. killed her, right? But the evidence for whatever reason wasn't enough to put him in jail for life, but he lost civilly, right? The family got the money because he lost because there was enough evidence. So I'm like, why do we treat family court and child custody like it's not a civil court? All you have to prove is that it probably happened and probably will happen again. You don't have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. And it shouldn't be beyond a reasonable doubt because we're talking about the safety of kids, right? So when we went into court, I even had a police officer from a different state, from Virginia, come to Maryland to be like, we think he did this twice.
Oh my.
And the judge was like, he hasn't been convicted. And it's no, but many people commit crimes that they're never convicted of because our court system is so busted. So not only did he try to get the money from the first woman, and family court gave his son back, by the way, which they shouldn't have done because he proceeded to abuse the kid. The kid reported him multiple times for abuse, and they continued to put the kid back in the house. So by the time I left, there was police coming to testify. We had the grandmother coming to testify about abuse. We had a police report where the kid had reported that his father had abused him. And I'm like, what is it going to take for you guys to realize that this guy is not safe? And then when Prince died, they were all like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that. I'm like, really?
You're like, I told you this.
This was not rocket science. And I think the thing that is so disturbing, I tell people all the time, I'm like, you look at all the evidence I had, right? That was a lot. This is a guy who was seriously affected. And I think a lot about there are so many things that don't even reach that level that are terrible. And I can't even imagine a scenario in which the courts would choose to protect a kid if they had all that and they still didn't do it.
Yeah, you don't have to tell me twice about the police, the lawyers, the judges. I'm just curious. So who did they think killed the ex-wife?
Oh, they all know it's him.
They know now, but that he was then...
They knew it then. Like the police all said, there's only one suspect. There's only one person. And they had enough information. They never found the gun, probably because he went to Florida where his actually family lives and got rid of it. And another problem in our country is like police departments from different states don't share. You just leave the state, you ditch it somewhere else, and then it's done. Nobody from Virginia is going to Florida to look for a weapon in a case where a black woman was shot. They're just not doing it. And all knew that he did it. And they never charged him. So you couldn't do a Google search and find his name even attached to her name. And then in the state of Virginia, he also changed when he changed his name, he changed his age too, and falsified a birth certificate. And this man was walking around with a concealment weapon license in the state of Virginia. I brought that to their attention when I had the PI, and they were like, well, he's not harming anyone. I was like, except the fact that he's killed 2 people. Like, here's something you can actually get him on, and they still wouldn't do it.
You were not dating when his ex-wife was already killed.
Yeah, it was a cold case by the time I met him.
Okay.
And I remember...
So he told you it was just an accident.
It was just an accident. I didn't even know she had been shot. He was like, oh, it was just a tragic accident.
Did you know he owned a gun?
Yeah, because the gun became a fixture in our relationship. Like, people think that it's easy to leave someone. I was like, it's easy until they tell you if you leave, you're going to leave in a body bag. So you don't leave because you're like, I don't want to get shot.
And how was your relationship, obviously, before it ended? Was it good?
It was good. I think it's always good at first. These guys don't come up and punch you in the face and say, you're a D. Like, it was great in the beginning. Like, he seemed financially secure. He seemed to be taking care of his son. His son was adorable, and I bonded with him too, which also adds a layer of hardness, right? Because I think it was about 6 months into the relationship when I got pregnant, which, I mean, yeah, that not an ideal situation. And I think that was really when things took a turn for the worse, because I think in his head, he was like, oh, I have her now. And he also knew the family court system. So he was like, every time I try to leave, he was like, I'm going to get custody. And he's not wrong. He probably...
Is that what he wanted? Custody?
That's what he said he wanted. I think he wanted me to pay him child support. I think he...
But according to him, he made money.
The thing that's crazy about it is when we left, Prince was 2 weeks old. I didn't hear from him for 3 months. He didn't ask for visits. He didn't ask to see him. Nothing. How he was, nothing. And he took out over $500,000 of life insurance before he even responded to my custody order 3 months later. And the thing that's crazy about insurance in this country, which is another area that I think needs to be cleaned up, especially when it comes to children, but you can take out a policy on your neighbor and that person won't know that you took out a policy on your neighbor. And so
that's crazy.
I was not aware that he took out a policy on Prince, and he told the insurance companies that I was dead. No one checked. Man did not even have custody of his son. Took out an insurance policy on him, said I was dead. And the insurance companies were like, oh, sure, this is normal to take out $580,000 on an infant.
Did you sue them?
You can't.
You can't sue an insurance company?
You cannot. It's crazy. It's similar. You can't sue a court. You can't sue a judge for, even if you find that the judge does something like completely corrupt, they're untouchable, which is part of the problem.
Yes. I'm currently in a lawsuit that involves insurance as well. And I am suing them because I have a misappropriation of funds. So John's life insurance policy went to the family instead of his beneficiary or the estate, which was Greyson.
Yeah, it should have gone.
It should have gone to the estate because nobody else was listed.
They never paid out because they didn't have to pay out because he was too stupid to realize that you can't
Got
insurance policy within a year. And then also, even if it had become like they never would have been forced to pay out, which is also effed up because it makes them not think about that. They should have been forced to pay out just for their life, just for being like liable, but they're not because they're like within a year, he died within a year of him taking out a policy. Plus it's a crime. You can't pay out on a crime. I still think they should have been forced to pay out to the estate, but they're not held accountable, and that's part of the problem. And it becomes like a gross business. So think about
1,000%
are probably committed because people think they're going to get insurance.
Yeah. No, that whole sector and even the whole probate side of death is another level of nightmare.
Yeah. I did sue the therapist, though. We had a therapist in the case because the judge at least understood enough to realize this guy's probably not firing on all cylinders. And the social worker in our case recommended us a psychological evaluation. Not that would have mattered. I don't actually think it would have, but whatever. It was a box to check. They let him hire the person of his choosing, which I'm trying to get them to stop doing because I think it's stupid. He hired somebody who did not actually have a license to test adults in the state. And she was actually a child psychologist who wasn't even licensed to test children outside of a school setting. Somebody who had diagnosed ADHD, but like probably is not going to understand how to deal with an adult. So I did sue her for practicing outside of her license. And I reported her to the medical board because I was like, she's still practicing, by the way. She just got probation and then had to be supervised or something for a period of time.
I tried to get a psych eval as well when Greyson was about 2.5, and it got filed in court and then never heard about it again. It just never happened.
I don't know. I get so frustrated with our system, and I can only think that perhaps part of the problem is that kids can't vote. And so I have long felt like this country has a civil rights crisis on their hands when it comes to children. And because they're not voters, they're like, oh, we don't care because they don't have the money. And there's this expectation that parents will transfer their civil rights to their children, which happens with healthy parents. But it's a huge assumption that someone's going to be healthy because you and I know there's crazy people out there. And as a country, we need to start addressing like how we make sure that children have agency and safety independent of their parents.
Very good point. I know they never take children's word for anything, but honestly, they know more sometimes than we do.
Yeah. I'm trying to practice it now with my kids. Like I try to be really conscious about, obviously they need parenting and they need some authority to help them not choose chaos. In moments where they can make decisions, I like to be like, look, you guys are people, right? It's your body. I want you to feel like you have some control and agency over yourself. And like my oldest is 10 and
How many children do you have?
I had two girls.
You have 3.
Oh, I have 3. I have 2 living ones, but I have 3 children. But yeah, the doctor, I like the fact that her doctor now talks to her instead of me.
Right.
Like it's her body, it's her.
Yeah. And she needs to be comfortable. So if she has an issue, she can just go to her doctor when she's a little bit older.
Yeah. And I also think if it comes down to a decision of, hey, do you want to get these shots now or like in a month? I turn to her, I'm like, look, if there's a medical necessity for you to do it now versus next month, then I'm going to be like, look, I'm going to be the tiebreaker here and you're doing it now. But like, if the doctor is saying it's a preference about whether or not what schedule do you want to be on, I'm going to look to her and be like, what do you want to do? Do you want to get 3 now or 2 now and 1 later?
When I read all that last night I read about how your sister was involved, and I read about the ex, and I feel for that other child that he had, because he's not going to do well.
I think he's an amazing kid, guy man now. He went into the military and now he's finishing his career. I think like anybody who's lived through a tragedy like this, he probably has a long journey. And honestly, anybody who's lived with my ex has got like a life therapy, right? But he has a very loving family in his mom's family. And I think they have wrapped their arms around him, and he went to them when he was 13, which he still had a long time with this crazy person. But I think he's going to be fine. But I do think, like, whenever you think about, and I testify to this when I testify in front of family court trying to change things, I'm like, even if you don't think your kid is in trouble, right? If you might be able to like say that, oh, I don't care about this issue because I either don't have kids or like my kids are never going to be family court. My response to that is, okay, but imagine the kid who has just been terrorized for the last 16 years. And next thing, he's knocking on your door and wants to take your daughter to prom. Yeah. Are you going to be okay about how he was living? Or if you don't have kids, are you going to be okay when this child eventually enters the workforce and then you're dealing with somebody who has acute trauma from what you have decided to ignore? Like, we don't live in an isolated society. Like, we're all going to have to deal with each other and each other's kids.
Absolutely. And why it's really good to play nice in the sandbox.
Yeah. I just want people to start caring.
That's what I think the whole world needs.
Yeah. It's just start caring. Just start thinking about somebody else, and then stop also thinking that these are like, I don't know if you've
isolated incidents.
And they're just like, oh, that was terrible. But that
doesn't happen. Yeah.
Oh, I've been doing this for 10 years. Like, my son died in 2012, and I have been in this movement of trying to change it for that long. And I have heard so many stories, and even the ones that don't amount to children dying, like, there's a lot of other terrible stuff.
I hear them too. And I'm blown away by the things that I hear that is still going on every day.
Yeah.
Since Prince passed, what have you done? And what do you want to see happen in the future?
Yeah. I focus a lot on writing as a means to have social movement. So before I wrote my book, I did a lot of op-eds on various things just because I think education is such a huge piece. I built a platform on social media, speak to a lot of survivors through my platform. Legislative wise, I've done a lot of work with the state of Maryland because that's where my case was.
Right.
We were able to get a bill passed a couple of years ago now that required judges to go through extra training related to child abuse and domestic violence cases, which is a huge win because
is that similar to Caden's law?
It is in line with Caden's law. One interesting thing about Caden's laws is there's funding associated with it, but states actually have to create laws in line with what Caden's law recommends. What we're trying to do in the state of Maryland, it's really hard because it has to be state by state, right?
Correct.
I was super excited when Caden's law finally got into federal, but I think the challenge I see is it's just like feels like death by a million paper cuts trying to do this on the state level and trying to help people understand that there's funding associated with it, but they have to actually make moves. Another thing that I'm trying to do in the state of Maryland, we've been trying to have a subsequent bill that requires the social workers that are in the custody evaluation process to have a minimum education standard. Fascinatingly, the judges are fighting us. And it's so weird because their fight is, oh, we have this already in the judges' rules. But in the judges' rules, it also says that they can ignore it. So what's happening in the state of Maryland is that, let's say you're a pedophile with lots of money to perhaps float the judge's way. The judge can let you hire your own custody evaluator that then says, oh, this person should have to go to one of those little camps, and so it's crazy because it sounds like when you hear about reunification camps, like it sounds like the crazy, like people are eating
insane,
right?
It sounds like a cult.
It sounds like a cult, but it also sounds, I think people turn their ears off because they're like, oh, this must be a conspiracy theory. But I'm like, no, I have met children who are now adults who have survived these.
Sure. I toured with Allie, who spoke in DC when we were there.
She's incredible, but she has gone through hell. And you listen to her story and you're like, I cannot believe this is happening in America.
And it still happens. I just read a mother named Rachel. I forgot her last name. She was arrested in California because her child was sent to a reunification camp and she wouldn't allow it.
It's crazy. There was a group of little kids. I think the girl was like 16 and the boy was maybe like 8 or 10 on social media. And the girl is brilliant. Like she started filming when they took them. And they've had this whole social media campaign. I think they were finally returned. But I think just looking at her, she's so brave to be able to do that as a teenager.
Yeah.
We've been trying to do that. I also I'm on the board of a nonprofit called the Supervised Visitation Network. The organization provides training for supervised visitation professionals, which is cool.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times people think it's babysitting. And I'm like, it's not babysitting. It's a profession. And some of the trainings that we provide that's really helpful is a lot of domestic violence training. So people understand trauma response. They understand how to treat a case where there is a domestic violence concern. For example, if you're supervising a father who is not to know the location of where the ex-wife is,
Right.
it might be innocuous for someone to be like, oh, what school do you go to? Or what's your neighborhood like? But in those types of situations, that's something that the supervisor should be like, no, sorry, you can't have that. So things like
you just never know what mindset you're dealing with someone.
And so what I'd like states to do actually, and this is another part of judge awareness, is I'd like them to start being aware that this is a profession and start requiring, if you're going to say supervised visitation, you require that the person that you recommend is actually trained to be able to serve that.
I would love to get something like that here in Florida. We have Greyson's law, but we couldn't get it associated with Caden's law to get that funding. But it's something that I feel very strongly about continuing, and training and judges training and all of what you just said is something that I want to see happen in Florida. So I'd love to talk more about that another time to see how we can help make that happen.
Yeah, we had to redraft the custody evaluator one because they didn't even put it up for a vote in Maryland, which was crazy. It got killed in the House. And I'm like, they don't want to put it up for a vote because they don't want to vote against something that is so very clearly sensical.
Yeah.
But I was like, I cannot wait until some of these people run for re-election because I am going to be out there on the ads being like, hey, they say they care about kids, but here's what I didn't.
Right. Or I can't wait till something, actually, this sounds horrible because I don't want it to happen to anyone, but I can't wait till it happens to someone who does have the authority to make changes and they experience firsthand something like we did. And then just because that's what it takes to make change it has to happen to you. I know people don't believe.
I wonder sometimes if the answer is for a bunch of us to get together and figure out how we can leverage getting people like us into office. Because honestly, I think that probably is.
I've thought about it. When I went to Tallahassee to get Greyson's law passed, I was like, I'm going to have to run.
That's the thing. It's like, how do we get to the point where we can figure out how to form our own PAC or something and really bolster these candidates? Because some of these local elections, people don't realize who they're voting for.
Oh, absolutely.
In the state of Maryland, I have been to so many legislative sessions to talk about family court. And I remember this one session where this guy, he got out there and was like, they were trying to change the legal marriage age. And he was like, oh, but what would happen if a 25-year-old got a 16-year-old pregnant? Shouldn't he be able to legitimize the baby? And I was like, you mean rape?
Oh my God. That is the definition.
Yes. And they've elected this man. This man is completely crazy. But they don't.
Yeah, half the time where we vote for people, I have it like a cheat sheet that I have to look at and see what they're for and against. I know in Florida, when we tried to get Greyson's law passed, first time we couldn't get it passed because it had words of coercive control, and they didn't like that. So we had to take it all out, which is insane.
We have those as well. And there's always the parental alienation people that come out and they're like, no, we should be able to coerce it. Bro,
nobody should control anything.
I think it's it needs to be recognized as a form of abuse. And I think that's perhaps something that we should all be continuing to scream to the mountaintops about.
Yeah, it's abuse. That's the type of abuse that I went through, and it killed my son. Didn't have scars. I didn't have physical, but it's a pattern that if someone is using coercive control to abuse someone, that they are capable of sinister things.
Yeah. And I think it's insidious. It's probably, I wouldn't say more insidious because it's one of those things where like abuse is abuse no matter what. But I think that not having the scars, going to work every day and people not understanding that when you come home, you are going to be in hell.
Yeah.
I sometimes wonder, had I had a black eye,
Yeah.
would I have got me intervention that I really so desperately needed?
Me too. And that's so sad because I still cried every single day. Even when Greyson was alive, I cried because I was being tormented and my stint of motherhood was tarnished. I felt like there has to be a better way. Now, I'm curious. You say you speak to a lot of other parents going through similar things and you hear all these stories. I know for me, it's really hard when they come to me for advice. What do you tell others?
That's one of the reasons I wrote my book. I think there's so many things depending on what they're going through. And one of the reasons I wrote the book is because I felt like I needed to write something that I needed when I was going through it. And I wanted to be able to have a body of work that I was really thoughtful about that could be that thing that people going through it could read and realize that they weren't alone. And the second piece was to give legislators and advocates like a map of here's things you can change. Look at all the things that went wrong. So it is both for survivors, people going through it, and also people who are wanting to join the movement to change it. What the number one advice for people is go to therapy. There's nothing wrong with therapist. I don't think it is possible to go through this level of trauma without seeing a therapist. In the same way as if you were to break your leg and then not cast it, and then you wonder why you can't walk. It's impossible to go through this and not get help unless you just want to continuously be in this place forever. And I also think I've spoken to a lot of people who have lost children, which I think is like I think pain is pain, but I think there is a certain level of devastation when you know that you can't go back and there is no fixing it for your child. I think what's important for people to understand is there is no right or wrong way to grieve, and people need to give themselves some grace and also stop feeling like somebody is going to give you the answer of what to do yourself. For me, like I needed to figure out a way to still parent my son, even though he wasn't here, which is why I remain an advocate and I still speak out about it because it's how I parent my son. But I also knew that I needed to be a mom. I needed to be a mom again. I needed to move on with my life, and I needed to do it my way, which is why I went and had a sperm donor, because I'm like, I'm never going
to. That's smart.
I don't ever want to have to worry about it. It's not that, look, there's some fantastic men in the world, and I am not a man hater.
No, I hear what you're saying.
I don't ever want to co-parent, like full stop. I want to meet my person, and I want to have a life with this person, but my kids are my kids. The decisions I make for my kids are going to be, you can be part of my village and my council, but I don't want to co-parent. So for me, I needed to think like, how do I keep living? Because I knew that I had two choices when Prince died. I could either die with him, which is a choice, or I could keep living. And I thought to myself, I'm like, if I die, he's going to be completely dead. If I keep living, I am the only thing left of him
than keeping him alive.
Because his dad doesn't count.
Sure.
So yeah, like I was like, if I'm going to actively make a choice to live, I need to actively choose to live well and not
for him.
Yeah, for him and for his sisters, and just choose to be the best person that I can be and try to make it so that this thing that happened can have a positive effect on society, even if Prince won't be the one benefiting from it.
I feel the same. In many ways, people always ask me how I get up in the morning. And I just tell them, because if I don't, then the murderer wins. And I will not let that happen. He already took away most of who I am and my only born child. And I will not let him end my life as well.
But I think it also has to be a balance, right? Like, I think that you have to find ways to find meaning in life. But in the last 12 years or so, one thing I have noticed is I think there are a lot of people who want to drag you down into their place of like upsetness or grief. And that's another reason I think the book has helped, because I'm like, look, I need you to read this and I need you to figure out what you need to do for yourself, because I can't save you. You save yourself. Like, there has to be a moment where you're like, this is what I want. This is what I need. I can give you the words to be like, you need to go find that and trust yourself. But
what about parents who their child or children are still alive and they just don't know what to do? What advice do you give them?
And I still tell them therapy, right? Don't use your as a therapist. They're expensive and they're not good ones.
Yep.
And so find a good therapist, find your kid a good therapist. That's super important. And also focus on what you can control. One of the biggest regrets that I have from my time with Prince is that I was not a very good mom, because I was consumed.
I doubt that.
I felt like I wasn't my best because I was so incredibly consumed with trying to save him. And I think back to those times. I remember Prince used to take my phone and hide it in his little toy car
because he didn't want you on it.
What? And I'm like, I tell parents a lot, I'm just like, okay, keep fighting. Sure. Do that. But don't do it at the expense of missing out on the moments that you're never getting back.
Right.
And also realize that you can only control so much, right? Like, most kids are not going to die the way Prince and Greyson died, right? Thank God. They will probably live through terrible situations. But I'm like, if you can be that child's rock and safe place, that might be the only thing you can do, right? You may not be able to control that the kid goes to his dad, right? Or mom. But you can control what their experience is when they're with you. So that's what I tell parents a lot. I'm like, you focus on you and not the trash that you can't control. Okay, he's not paying child support. Yes, you're with a deadbeat. Like, he's not going to pay child support. But don't get wrapped around the axle about that. Do the best you can for your kid.
It's hard when people ask for advice because I tell them to take their kid and run.
Honestly, and that's the thing. I can't be mad at people who do that. I wish I had that option.
Yeah, there's a lot of things I wish I did differently.
But I'll tell you, like, the asylum laws internationally are not our friend. So that could end up backfiring hard.
This has been so great talking with you. It's so sad to know that our situations are just everywhere, and how many other parents I've met that have gone through something similar or think they might be going through something similar, which is even worse because they could prevent it now, which is, I think, the hardest part.
I think the part that will drive parents crazy is the thought that they can prevent it, right? Look back at you did everything you could do, right? And it's impossible to like go down this spiral of crazy to try to think one step ahead of crazy person.
I say that all the time. I'm like, I don't speak crazy, so it's really hard to know.
It's like you did the best you could and it still ended the way that it did. And I did the best I could and it still ended the way that it did.
So what could you have done differently?
But that's the thing. I think my biggest mistakes were made in the relationship with that man, not reading the red flags and even when I became pregnant, frankly, the best chance I had was to lie to him and not put him on the birth certificate and just vanish. And I have thought about this over and over again.
Yeah.
There were things that I wish I knew that I just couldn't know at the time, like the life insurance. Like, I called around because I was worried about it. I just never could know.
Did you have a family court lawyer at the time?
I did. Also problematic. Their names have been changed to the book to a pseudo. But I think they probably most people don't assume that someone's going to be this crazy. So they make decisions based on thinking the person is a rational human being. So I can't say they were bad. I spent $150,000 trying to save him in a year.
Is there something that you think your lawyer could have done differently?
No. I go back on, I think that when the therapist was appointed, they could have done the due diligence to actually check to see if she was... The courts, frankly, should have done that, but they didn't. And in hindsight, I was paying so much money, they probably should have vetted all of it.
Right.
But I don't know if that was like common enough practice for them to have done it. Like they also assumed that she had a license. So perhaps then I also think it's okay, maybe I could have checked. I don't know that would have changed anything. I think eventually it may have bought him another couple months, but I think eventually he was going to get him at some point.
What were the red flag now that you look back?
I think that there were things in his story that didn't add up. I think that there were moments within the 6 months that the mask fell a little bit. Like he would either get mad at his son in a way that was like a little bit irrational or something like that was off. And then even at the 6-month mark, I wasn't sure what I was looking at. I thought he was like having some sort of depressed episode.
Right.
And I think spent most of the relationship trying to get him back to the person I thought he was, instead of realizing, oh, wait, this crazy person was him and the other one was an act. Like,
Did he ever go to therapy?
oh, no. Yeah. But I don't even think he's not a good candidate for therapy either. You can't be a psycho in therapy.
Right. I always said that if John did get that psych eval, he probably would have passed because he's that crazy.
I had a good one, though, because my ex had a psych eval during the first case, and they called out that he had narcissistic personality disorder.
So did John.
They saw it. I think the hard part is we all know there's a spectrum of sociopathy or whatever.
Yeah.
These people are like, your ex and my ex are definitely on the far end of the psychopath spectrum. But I think that there is generally a hesitance in the psychological community or the community of psychology to say that someone is a psychopath.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Like, I did all the things. Like,
No,
I
absolutely.
forensic therapist call him and point out all the things that we knew about him that were on the scale, the narcissistic personality psychopath scale. It just didn't matter.
I think people think that narcissism is just a trait or a quality, but it's actually a personality disorder that can cause someone to be a psychopath or a sociopath. I think it starts there. If someone is narcissistic, they think they're above God, and nobody is. So that's a problem.
Yeah. But if you think about, like, our society accepts that. I think I saw you post the other day about Donald Trump. I'm like, part of the reason that during the last administration I had to stop watching the news is I kept getting triggered because like his mannerisms, the way he talks, it's like they have a playbook, but our society accepts it. It's like people look at it and they're like, oh, that's fine. It just means he's powerful. And I'm like, no, me to know.
Yeah, people that are powerful, look at Barack Obama. He had a lot of power, but he wasn't a narcissist.
He was crazy. Yeah, I don't know. I wish that there was something I could tell people in the system to do that will change the outcome. I think the hard part is that it's similar to when you have an illness that has no cure and you join a trial and they tell you like, oh, this is unlikely to help you, but the information we get from this will help people in the future. Right. And that doesn't feel good to hear, but that's really the bottom line is people who are going through it right now. These changes that we're trying to make are unlikely to help their situation immediately. We hope that it will get to the point where people in the future will not have to deal with the same stuff that we had to deal with. But the reality on the ground is that it doesn't matter what state a child is born in, they're not safe if they have an unsafe parent.
1000%. And that's what I've been preaching since the get-go. It's just proving that they have that parent.
Yeah. Hard. It's really hard.
It's the hardest because I feel like only the sane parent has that gut instinct, and it's hard to prove. Now, everyone can read all about your story in your book, correct?
Yeah. I tried to, like I said, it took me a decade to write.
I just started mine, so I hear you. It's going to be a while.
And I had to step away from it. And I wrote a fiction novel in parallel that I'm hoping to publish in the next.
That's awesome.
Because I was like, I need an escape from this.
Started a children's book also.
Exactly. So you need to have that balance because it's such a hard and dark subject.
Yeah, no, it sucks everything out of me. So I hope you then lighten it up with a children's book, which is actually about grief. Yeah. What would you like the world to know about Prince?
I firmly believe that Prince chose me to be his mom. I think our kids find us for certain reasons. I sometimes laugh and talk to him and say, yo, did you have to choose me for this?
Right.
But I think I will always grieve him because he was the love of my life. And I only got to know him for 15 months. But I think he will change the world.
Yep. That's how I feel about Gig. I say he was the gift I couldn't keep. They are saving the world. I get emails every day that Greyson's Law in Florida saved their lives. So it's little things like that that do make it a little bit easier to wake up in the morning.
Totally. And yeah, I'm hoping that if one judge reads my book or one person in the system reads it and just at least even for a second has...
Maybe you should send a copy to all of them.
Oh, I have. I've been starting to bring it around to Maryland legislators as well.
I can't wait to read it. I actually just ordered it on Amazon. So where can everyone get it? Is it available everywhere? Okay.
You can order it from your local indie store. You can ask the library. It's on audio version or obviously Amazon. It's very ubiquitous as a bookseller. So you can go on there and buy it. BarnesandNoble.com. Any of the booksellers should be able to get it.
Great. I can't wait to read it. And I thank you immensely for joining us today in our first episode of Gray Minds Think Alike. If you have any questions for me, I'd love to answer.
I am curious. I see that you have a nonprofit, which is really awesome to know what you're doing with that and if there's any way I can help.
So I started Greyson's Choice because so many people have been reaching out and I wanted to be a resource for them and figure out, okay, what can we do? What can I do to help these people? I'm still figuring that out because people need lawyers, they need money, they need people to help with training. We got Greyson's Law passed. So there's a lot that we want to do with training and educating and getting that in front of judges and lawyers as well here in Florida. But for now, this podcast is going to be probably the number one resource that I could offer listeners and people out there that have questions. Maybe if I don't know the answer, I want to interview that person and get the answers for them. And that's really all that I can do at this point.
Yeah.
So
I'll be really excited to read it. Let me know if you need any advice there because it's a process.
Yeah. Now I'm a writer, so I write blogs, I write articles, but I've never written a book and I've never had it be so personal and raw and things like that. But like you, I want everyone to know what goes on. I want them to hear our story because these things happen. And if we don't tell them, no one would believe it. Nobody.
Yeah, totally. I know for me, when I was writing my memoir, there's a writing organization called Hugo House. It's based out of Washington State, but they have virtual options for classes. And I was in a year-long memoir course, which was actually really helpful because I was able to
You have the cliff notes for that class?
Sadly, no. But the best part of it was really just to connect with other people who are in that writing process and having to grapple with certain things. Like I know in memoir, what's hard is you're telling a true story, right? And so you have to be careful about how you say things about certain people, the living and things like that. So it was helpful to be
because it's your truth.
Yeah, but it's tough. It is also hard. It's also why it's harder to traditionally publish, in my opinion, with the memoir, because people get really weird about, what if you can triangulate and know who the person is? And I'm like, I don't know.
That's how you...
The person said these things, so I can't really protect them when it comes to what they actually said.
Well, and my person killed himself.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess I wonder, do you wish that you had a day in court or do you feel like this was easier than having to do that?
I think both ways. A part of me wishes that I could see him get that justice, even though I know he's dead, but he chose that. He murdered himself. And then he just left me alone in this grief. It's just me rather than him feeling something as well. But then again, at the end of the day, he's dead and I don't have to deal with that part. And I don't want to say I don't think about it because I think about it all the time, but yeah, he is in hell and that's the place where he belongs.
Yeah. It took us 5 years to get a conviction. He wasn't finally convicted until 2017, which was a lot. And honestly, I think I probably would have rather him just kill himself.
And then if he was going to kill himself anyway, why did he have to take an innocent baby with him?
Yeah.
Anyway, I thank you for your time and I hope we can chat again and further. And I know we both have some big things that we want to see happen and I'd love to help in any way I can.
Awesome. Looking forward to collaborating.
All right. I will talk to you soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
If there's someone that you want to hear from on this podcast, please feel free to send me an email. Or if you would like to be a guest, please reach out at Allie@Greyson'sChoice.org. If you'd like to continue to hear our podcast, please consider donating at Greyson'sChoice.org.